Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and this time I've got a full tank review for you on the Panzer 3K, a tier 5 German premium medium tank that has hit the shop quite soon after the Terran Prototypush. I think that's how you say it anyway. Anyway, another tier 5 German premium medium tank. Let's see if this one is worth it. So let's compare the Panzer 3K to the Terran 3 Prototypush, the Panzer IV Hydrostat, both of which are tier 5 German premium medium tanks, and also to non-premium German tier 5 tanks, such as the Panzer III-4, the Panzer IV-H, and also the tier 4 Panzer III. So we see that all the tanks in this comparison use 75mm main guns with 110 alpha damage. And it's here why you can see that the Panzer 3K is a whole tier higher than the standard Panzer III, and that is the penetration. 103mm on its standard rounds is way better than the short 75mm that is on the tier 4 Panzer III. Nevertheless, 103mm of penetration at tier 5 is not very good at all, is it? That's 10mm less than the standard rounds on the very similar Terran 3. Fortunately, the Panzer 3K's rate of fire is the best in this comparison, along with the Terran 3 and also the Panzer IV-H, giving it a slight DPM advantage over the Hydrostat and the 3-4. One thing I didn't like about the Panzer 3K was the shell velocity. 740 meters per second just feels so darn slow, and it's very challenging to be able to hit moving targets at very long ranges. Now, anyone who's played the Terran 3 will know that one of the weakest aspects of the tank is the fact that it can only carry 32 rounds of ammunition, and considering that its average damage per shell is 110, that means you can very rarely be able to do 3000 damage in that tank, even if you penetrate most of your shells. Thankfully, the Panzer 3K has 40 rounds, which is 8 extra than the Terran 3, which is a rather nice aspect, but this is still a very low amount of ammunition to be able to take compared to the Hydrostat, the 3-4, and the Panzer IV-H, and even the Panzer III at tier 4. I have no idea why Wargaming would limit the amount of ammunition that these two vehicles take. Maybe it's to stop them from carrying really hard in low tier games. Aiming time wise, the Panzer 3K has 2.3 seconds, which is the same as all of these vehicles except for the Terran 3, which has 2.2 seconds aim time, and its accuracy is a rather disappointing 0.4, which is worse than all of the other vehicles apart from the short 75 on the Panzer III. Now, one thing that is absolutely baffling about this tank is the gun dispersion. When moving and turning the tank, it is 0.36, and when turning the turret, it is 0.16. This is so much worse than the Terran 3, meaning that your aim time is dramatically longer. And when we compare this dispersion to all of the other vehicles, it is just awful. The aiming time on this tank is horrific, which is certainly a very frustrating aspect about the tank. Thankfully, it gets awesome gun depression, which should mean that working on ridge lines is easy with 10 degrees. That's way better than on the 3-4, which only gets 6 degrees. So how about the mobility of the Panzer 3K? Well, it goes at 40 kilometers an hour forwards, the same as the Terran 3 and the Panzer IV-H, but it pales in comparison compared to the Hydrostat, the 3-4, and the predecessor, the Panzer III at tier 4. Unfortunately, however, this vehicle doesn't seem to have been designed to go backwards, only able to go at 12 kilometers an hour, and that makes it very frustrating when you want to pull back round a corner, or maybe just stop someone from traversing around your side. Now, if you were hoping that the Panzer 3K was going to get the same awesome power to weight ratio that the Panzer III at tier 4 has, well, you're gonna be disappointed, because the engine power is only 300. That's 140 less than the standard Panzer III. And to make things worse, the Panzer 3K is actually heavier than the Terran 3 and the Panzer III by 3 tons. And so this means that the power to weight ratio of the vehicle is disappointing, just like on the Terran, 13.19. Way worse than the very nippy Panzer III. Thankfully, the ground resistances on this tank are pretty okay at 0.9, 1.1, which is slightly better than the Terran 3, but really this is still quite a slow medium tank. Fortunately, the vehicle does have one thing better than the Terran 3, however, and that is the turret traverse and the tank traverse at 32 and 38 degrees a second respectively. So how about the hull armor of the Panzer 3K? Maybe it's gonna be awesome. Oh dear, 50 at the front, 30 at the side, and 50 at the rear of the hull, and 50 on the front of the turret, 30 on the side of the turret, and 30 at the rear of the turret. If we look at the standard Panzer 3, we find that it's got 70mm of hull armor along the mid plate and 50mm of lower hull armor, whereas on the Panzer 3K, it's got 50 on the midplate, 20mm less, but the same 50mm of lower hull armor. Unfortunately for the Panzer 3K, it also has this absolutely horrific hat on top of the tank, well, cupola I guess, but fortunately this part of the armor is 95mm thick, so this will quite often ricochet lower tier tanks and equal tier tanks as well, compared to the Panzer 3 where the top hat is only 50mm thick, so at least it's got that going for it. Turret armor wise, the Panzer 3K is kind of disappointing, 50mm outside of the mantlet, which also has 50 extra millimeters of spaced armor on it. But if we look at the difference between the thickness of this mantlet on the standard Panzer 3 and the Panzer 3K, we can see that the spaced armor covers just a much smaller part of the vehicle. So what this means with the Panzer 3K is that you should count yourself lucky if you ricochet anything that isn't 1 or 2 tiers below you, because angled like this, the most effective thickness of the armor is about 100mm right on this upper plate here, and they'd have to miss just a gigantic amount of your side armor or even your turret armor. So while there's no doubt that the viewports on top of the Panzer 3K are more heavily armored than on the Turan 3 prototype push, and they're also smaller, you also have to deal with the fact that you no longer have that 75mm of turret armor, it's going down to 50. Thankfully, however, the Panzer 3K actually has one thing going for it, and that is the view range is 350 meters, which is much better than the Turan 3 at 330 meters, which should mean that you're more reliably able, at least with binoculars, to get up until that 445 meters maximum spotting distance, even without an excellent crew. But I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's get stuck into some gameplay. So here we go, we're playing on Windstorm, and the eagle-eyed of you might already notice that I am actually playing on my North American account, and that's because this vehicle is currently only released on the North American server, but it should come to the European server soon, TM. I don't have an exact date, however, but I'm looking forward to picking one up on my main account. Well, we'll have to see what my overall opinion on it is, and whether I will try and pick one up on my main account. Who are you kidding, QuickyBaby? You're some massive tank collector. Anyway, let's focus on the mobility of this tank. Down to 20 going up this slope. Fair enough, this slope is not that shallow, at least with regards to the gradient. But yeah, this pretty mediocre 13 power to weight ratio not really doing this tank proud. And now we're going to see what the difference is having a Panzer 3 at tier 3, that Panzer 3A, a light tank, versus the tier 5 Panzer 3K. Gosh, each one of our shots pretty much taking off half of his hit points. He puts one into us, but we managed to finish him off. He did 75 damage to us, we put 3 rounds into him, and we've taken him out the game. Well, I guess that's the difference between a tier 3 tank and a tier 5 tank, right? I should also mention that this vehicle does not get preferential matchmaking, and I think the hydrostat does. I don't think the hydrostat can meet tier 7 tanks, but this vehicle definitely can meet tier 7s. So now we're going to be picking on much larger targets. We're going to try and deal with 2 top tier heavy tanks on the enemy team. That should be a little bit more tricky than dealing with their tier 3 tanks, even if it is the same kind of model as the vehicle that I'm playing. So this DW2 isn't doing very well, and we can see that I can be quite sneaky with this 25x zoom while keeping my frontal armor angled so the T1 heavy isn't hitting us. And I don't know what that DW2 was doing, but he allowed us to shoot him 5 times. So far I've only used standard ammunition, but now that I'm shooting at this T1 heavy, I'm actually going to fire a few premium rounds here because I want to get to it through his armor. I should also mention that this is a completely fresh crew. I don't have Sixth Sense, I don't have repair skill, I don't have anything because this is pretty much one of the first games that I played in this tank. We flank the Sherman 3, shut him down, and then start to go after that T1 heavy again. Will we be able to find him? Now we're going to be able to use the... we don't really need to use the gun depression here, but remember this tank does have 10 degrees. We're going to load an APCR round to finish him off there, right through the upper plate. 4 kills in 2.5 minutes, 1,000 damage in a tier 5 tank. Low tiers for me just don't really feel as challenging or as exciting as playing the high tier games, but here comes a T80. Now look at this aim bloom. How awful is the dispersion? Unless you're sitting still in this tank, frankly, you're not going to be hitting much. It's probably one of the worst aspects of this tank. Look, every time I turn the turret, every time I move the tank or the hull, we're seeing that awful 0.36 dispersion while moving and the 0.16 while turning the turret. It really is a rather awkward affair with this tank, and you'd be far better to have the Turan 3 if you want to have low aim time. Because remember, the Turan 3 has that 2.2, whereas this is 2.3, and then the dispersions just add to it. But here we're taking on another Panzer 3K. He puts one through, he takes our engine out, he wants to come around and sneak another shot in. Fair enough, he fires 3 APCR rounds into our tank, but we took out pretty much the entirety of his vehicle there. 4 rounds into him, 412 damage, and we secure our 5th kill of the game. And now we're going for this KV-1S. We sneak a shot round the corner. Come on, we're going to finish him off. Oh, God. The Crusader's trying to grind through us, and an absolute disaster here. As we missed the KV-1S because the Crusader was grinding into us, and so he finishes us off, and so we don't get our Top Gun. And then, yeah. Okay, yeah, low tier World of Tanks. I'm definitely playing tier 5, guys. Anyway, my team managed to go and finish this round off. And in just under 4 minutes there, we were able to still have a rather decent game for a tier 5 tank. 1,685 damage done and 5 kills. So while undoubtedly I did get the full low tier experience here, what did we really learn about the Panzer 3K from this replay? Well, its mobility is rather mediocre and its aim time is horrific. But if you can afford to just sit still and shoot at your opponents and you know their weak points, the 1,650 damage per minute does start to pick up rather quickly, and having that 600 hit points, which I should mention is way more than a Panzer 3-4, which only has 440, and it's more than the Turan 3 at 570, does kind of allow you to take a beating. And so this vehicle is kind of more of a heavy tank than a medium tank, but it just doesn't really have the armor of a heavy. Anyway, let's just take a look at some more gameplay, this time on Malinovka. So this time we're certainly not top tier, and in fact the enemy have got 2 extra tier 6 tanks than us. GG matchmaking. Anyway, when half of the enemy team are tier 6, 1 tier higher than you, that's not too bad. It's only really when you start having to deal with tier 7 tanks in this vehicle that I feel that the penetration on the main gun is rather disappointing. 103mm of penetration on its standard rounds, 139mm of penetration on its premium rounds. That's really not going to be able to do anything to a T-29 unless you get flush onto the side or the rear of the vehicle. And even if you have the side, you're most likely to have to fire premium rounds unless he's not angling at all. But nevertheless, there is one thing that I really enjoy about the Panzer 3K. 350 meters base view range is fantastic at tier 5. And even though I have got, as I mentioned before, a terrible crew in this tank, with binoculars we're able to get our view range up above 445 meters, which means that we should be fairly proficient as a scout here. And what better to shoot at than an M3 Lee? But just take a look how much lead I have to give with these awful shell velocity. Gosh, the shell velocity on this tank, what was it, 770 I believe, or even 740. You have to give lead, like, see how I'm constantly having to adjust our position, and because that guy was ducking and weaving, we were unable to connect the shell. Or maybe that was just my poor marksmanship. But I'm pretty sure I was the one who was spotting there. Of course, there are T-67s next to me who are likely to be using binoculars as well. But maybe we're going to be getting some assistance damage for this. We're only going to be able to see later on. So I don't feel like I'm being too much use now, considering that the battle lines have advanced. Once you see that your friends start to get around this area, that means that you probably want to take a risk to make an aggressive play. Now, making this play in a high-tier game, it might be risky in a tank that is as slow as this, and that's because their view range is going to be better from around here, and probably you're going to get spotted. Now, while I don't have 6th sense, and I have no idea if I did get spotted making that gap, we do know that we've managed to make it across. And at low-tier games where the view range is dramatically less, you're quite likely to be able to make it through safely. Now we're going to try and take some punts at these tier 6 heavies as they're working their way up onto the hill, but you're going to see the awful aim bloom on this tank. It just means that you have to aim forever. I'm still aiming, finally fully accurate, but the shell misses with the 0.4 accuracy on this tank. Finally, we put one in to the SU-100 in his side. Try and find another one. Not quite able to do so. This tank certainly isn't a sniper. And while it does have view range and you can spot your opponents at long range if you're using binoculars, you're best to really try and find those short to mid-range engagements that you saw me perform quite well on the previous map. But sometimes you, on a map such as Malinovka, you don't have the option of being a short to mid-range flanker. If I went up on the hill, I'd be facing off against those T150s, or even the SU-100. Those are the kind of tanks with their 300 to 390 alpha damage that are going to two-shot you. And so you really want to try and keep the engagement at mid to long range there. Now you'd be far better in the Turan Prototype Ush to in those kind of mid to long range engagements. So I guess you've got to weigh up if the aim, not the aim time, the view range advantage that this vehicle has is worth the sacrifice of the aim time between the two vehicles. And that really is the key difference between these two tanks, because their mobility is pretty much the same. Their guns, apart from the aim time, are pretty much the same as well. It's just you're trading view range for your aim time. Now we managed to shut down an artillery on the enemy team, that AMX 105 AM taken out, and now I decide that I want to try and push in. All of these tanks are not spotted any longer. Oh, that's a replay bug actually. They're all dead by now. We're just going to have to try and ignore that. But here is a higher tier artillery, the M44, a tier 6 American self-propelled gun. We put our first in, now we load some high explosive shells. Looks like that one missed. Hopefully the next one will go in. Yes, it does. That's a good shutdown right there. Now I'm going to advance into the base, and I was thinking that the game was pretty much safe at this point. I couldn't really see us losing this. We've got a platoon of fairly skilled T-67s going up on the hill, and all they have to do is take out a T-150 and a Panzer IV-H on the enemy team. And they've also got 2 artillery supporting them. And so I decided that I wanted to go into the enemy cap, either pressure it, or to try and dig out a KV-2. The KV-2 is called Mad Dog, and yeah, generally people who play KV-2s are those kind of guys. So we're going to have to see if we're going to be able to pick a fight here against a higher tiered heavy tank. But remember, we've only really got the mobility of a slow or mediocre medium or a relatively fast heavy. That KV-2 definitely spotted us there. We put a shot against his mid-plate, which is usually the weak point of the tank. It fails to penetrate, so I decide to load some premium rounds. We put one into him. He misses us. That means it's our opportunity to start to put some rounds into him because he's got a very long reload. We put our third into his mid-plate, and that is the weak point of the KV series that you want to try and go for. Our fourth in, and now I'm just turning him round. Looks like he might have a damaged turret right now. So we're going to try and get round him again. Should be able to finish him off. And now this is where I make a bit of a mistake. I load standard rounds now. Hashtag QuickyBaby bounces off his butt. I put one in. I get one shot. I lose 580 health to the KV-2. We leave him on 67 health. And unfortunately, it looks like the Panzer IV-H on the enemy team absolutely carried the hill along with the T-150. And from here on, we lose. So a bit of a disappointment here at the end of the game. I guess I fought the troll and the troll won. Don't mess with 152 millimeters of Soviet steel, guys. But nevertheless, this was still a great game for the Panzer 3K, as we're going to see in the post-game stats. So that round on Malinovka was 2,392 experience, not for a double. And that was the first ace tanker in this vehicle. We got a high caliber in a tier 6 game, 1,697 damage done. That was 938 base experience. Add a premium account and it's 1,407. Then we get the action payout for having courageous resistance, as we picked up the high caliber medal of 422. And then also there's a bonus for it being a premium vehicle of 563. And that's one nice aspect of this tank, that it does make a large amount of experience that you can use to either crew train, or alternatively, if you're so inclined, convert off using gold and use on other vehicles. So all in all, this was a very generic game. Let's see how much spotting we did. Only 378. I expected that I did a little bit more than that, but we did make some rather nice credits after we resupply the ammunition. Even the premium rounds that I fired at the KV-2, we made 33,353 credits. And I'm just so sad that the KV-2 one-shot us, or that we were a little bit cheap and we stopped firing the APCR at the KV-2's butt, because if we'd taken him out, I'm fairly sure I would have either been able to cap or at least have a nice fun game at the end against these fellows. So how about Windstorm? Again, a really nice experience total here, 2,335, 49,000 credits. We did resupply a few consumables this time, however, and also fired a few premium rounds, but we still made 25,000 credits profit. We got 1,112 base experience points, add on the premium account bonus, and also, again, the rather rather meaty bonus for being a premium vehicle of 667, and you can see that this tank, even if you have fairly averagey games, does make a lot of experience. So now comes the part of the video where we discuss, is the Panzer 3K worth it? Well, Wargaming NA are currently charging $13, and in this current climate that's over £10 for this tank. And frankly, if you already have the Turan 3, then you pretty much already have this tank. The only real differences between the Turan 3 and the Panzer 3K is that you're sacrificing penetration to gain additional ammo, but you're losing aim time to be able to increase your view range. And so if you already have a Turan 3, then this is probably something that you might want to skip out on. And I just think it's a little bizarre that Wargaming are releasing another tier 5 premium German medium tank that is so similar just a couple of months after the previous one. But then again, I guess the reason why the prototype push is special is because it's a Hungarian tank, right? Even though it's within the German tech tree. All in all, the Panzer 3K is a rather run-of-the-mill tank that if you know what you're doing, you can still have some absolutely fantastic games in. And I'd probably skip this one out because frankly there's just nothing special about it. It's a very mundane tank. Unless you're an avid tank collector, or maybe you just want to focus train your German medium tank crews. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this tank review, or maybe it was just useful to you. If it was, please consider giving it a like down below. It really helps the channel out. And if you want to see what the Turan 3 prototype bush is, then simply click through up here or use that more info icon in the top right hand corner of your screen. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about the Panzer 3K. Have you picked one up already on the North American server? Was it worth it? And also just a heads up that you might want to clear your diary for Tuesday the 12th of July because I'm doing one of the most exciting streams ever in my last 4 years on Twitch. Jingles is going to be there, and I'm going to release a dedicated video detailing all of the aspects of the Tuesday stream. But anyway guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.